Halo is a franchise that has quite a rich history. Everyone has a story to tell about it, and so do the developers. It's entirely normal for games to cut content as part of the development process, and you're likely to find a plethora of content for a lot of games. But for a lot of FPS franchises, the development process isn't quite well documented, whereas that's quite the opposite with most Halo games. And then in the instances where the developers haven't shared a lot, the community have always been there to dig through files to determine what could have been. So for this video, I thought I'd delve deep into this part of Halo's history and pick out 7 cut features or items from Halo games that I thought were quite interesting, not overly well known, and have some sort of interesting evidence or story behind. So sit back, relax, and here are 7 cut items and features from Halo games.
Ultimate Halo.
Hey up lads, Fletch here from Ultimate Halo. Thank you so much for stopping by. Please consider subscribing. I'm trying to hit 80,000 subscribers at the minute, and your help would mean a lot, and also liking the video would mean absolutely everything for me on this channel. Also really curious to know in the comments down below, what cut content from a Halo game do you wish stayed in the final release and why? Really want to know sort of what the fans want to go forward in a Halo game that might have been once in the past, so let me know down below. Halo 3 is a game that I hold dear to my heart. It's my favourite Halo game overall, and it actually really surprised me when I didn't know that this was a cut feature when I was doing my research for the video, because this game was my jam back in the day. High Ground is by far one of my favourite Halo maps of all time. I love asymmetric maps, and when I saw this for the first time I knew I fell in love with the layout, the bridge on the map, attacking the team from the beach. It's honestly just so good, and I'd love to see it spiritually remade in Halo Infinite. But when I was looking back at the Halo 3 Vidocs, I was listening to them talking about having an interest for more asymmetric maps in Halo 3, and then Chris Carney, who was the multiplayer environment lead, explained that the map had towers which had AI turrets that would tag you whilst running up the hill. Of course they realised this was too hard for players to handle, but then it got me thinking it would be a cool feature for something like Warzone if it reappears in Halo Infinite. Almost in the sense that you could have turrets on bases much like Halo Wars 1 and 2, and then you can spend some rec points for example to temporarily activate them just to give your team a bit of fire support whilst you're trying to get a foothold back on your base. On the back of that, it's also entirely possible that's where the turret guardians were born on the back of Halo 3's map Snowbound. When you go to leave the map, they absolutely rain hell on you because you're not allowed to leave the bounds. Overall, it's a feature I'd like to come back in Halo Infinite, but I'd agree with the cut in general in terms of how they worked it in the original game, and it would be nice to see it reworked in another way. The melee system in Halo is something that's not really changed much over the years. You press your dedicated button to whack your opponent, but that's it. We've seen things such as assassinations, Spartan charge and ground pound come into play, but the basic backsmack has always remained the same how it is. But for those who remember back all the way in the Halo 2 days prior to launch, there was the crazy E3 trailer that got fans hyped, but behind the scenes Bungie knew that they couldn't ship this as part of the game because the graphics engine was way too advanced and ended up scrapping the whole thing. Whilst elements such as vehicle boarding remained as a thing, and in terms of the core mechanics most of them stayed the same, one thing that did take a step back was the melee system. As we can see in this footage, you're about to make a flurry of attacks to take a brute out. Personally, I don't think it would have worked in terms of Halo Sandbox. Would it be a campaign only thing? I guess so. It's hard to say because we've never really seen it working in the multiplayer element, especially in lots of the alpha footage, but as soon as you got close to the enemy and you did attack them with this flurry, it would be a little bit overpowered. But yet at the same time, if it locked you into doing the attack and the other player could dodge it, they could potentially back off and kill you because you're vulnerable at that point. That would have been a way you could have implemented it in multiplayer. It was honestly one of those things we'll never know I suppose, but I would like to know the story behind it behind the scenes, but leave it with me, I'll do some digging next time I speak to Sketch, so I'll keep you all posted. Oh boy, I bet Duquesne23 is definitely rubbing his hands together for this one. In Halo 3 we did see the MONGOOSE for the first time. It's a little quad bike like vehicle and it was a welcomed addition to the Halo family ever since. Now I think it's pretty well known at this point that Halo 2 did have a mongoose at some point in development, and thanks to YouTubers such as General Heed, we can now see gameplay from the beta version, and in all honesty it looks like it was pretty far into development. The sounds weren't just there yet in terms of it using the Warthog sound, but in terms of how it plays, it looks like it would be a pretty solid addition to Halo 2. It's also not entirely clear why it ended up being cut from the final game, but it's possible that they simply ran out of time, or they might not have had many gameplay instances to use it in the final game. Though throughout the whole game you pretty much used the Warthog throughout the campaign, and the mongoose didn't really seem to fit any of the scenarios. But yet again, this doesn't necessarily matter because the elephant was part of Halo 3's multiplayer, not in the campaign, so it was just on Sandtrap. So I'm simply putting this down to time restrictions, which is a real shame because I think it would have been perfect for a map like Zanzibar. Halo 5 is also a bit of an oddity when it comes to cut content, but this time more in the sense that there's not much in terms of official sources out there for the content itself. Bungie back in the day were quite open in terms of how they showed off a lot of the cut content in Vidocs to show you how they got to the end result of their product. However, 343 do take a bit more of a controlled approach to it, just showing the bits that they want you to see for the final game. With that in mind, it still hasn't stopped the community from digging deep into the files of the game, and Gamecheat 13, as per usual doing his thing, has always done a great job of doing the dirty work that practically none of us either have the time or talent to do. When he was digging around in one of the updates for Halo 5 on PC, he noticed that there were some new brute weapons. Some of them were just tagged onto other weapon models to replicate things such as the brute spiker, but there was also the DMR with a unique scope design which packed a hell of a punch. It shot quite slowly and it latched the projectile onto its target to then create an explosion, then taking out their shields. This weapon just seems so cool and the scope is awesome. However, from a lore perspective, I do find this DMR to be a little bit of a stretch to believe. The UNSC wouldn't really make something that looks like this, and it has a sort of scope made out of rags, which with the Banish becoming a thing, it's likely that the UNSC wouldn't work with them in any form, but of course they do talk to other brute factions which they are allied with, which is possible they make weapons for, but I'd still find it really hard to believe. Regardless, I'd love to see the brutes come back in Halo Infinite with their weapons, and it's completely understandable why this didn't really get too far into development. Still to this very day, there are things from Halo games that were cut that I just really want to see return for a future title, and this is one of them. In the year 2000, Bungie showed off a long play trailer for Halo Combat Evolved, and they raided a Forerunner site, which was then ambushed by a group of elites, and god damn it, this elite had like the coolest shield you've ever seen. I can only suspect this was due to them thinking it might be too difficult to fight, or they didn't want to use too many energy shields because the Jackals were already using them. It's something I've always wanted to use myself from a gameplay perspective as well. It would always feel so awesome for the player to be able to pick up a shield in a Halo game and block off shots from enemies with it, obviously depleting the energy the more fire you receive. I suppose it's also something that's quite hard to replicate in first person, and I guess in Halo 4 we did get the hard light shield. It took you to third person and you also couldn't fire at the same time. From a balancing perspective it makes sense, but design wise with the triangles on the version we saw in the trailer is just awesome. On screen you can also see some 3D art by my good friend Will, also known by Pixelflare, who also started Ultimate Halo back in the day, and the art that he made with this just looks so cool. Please 343, just bring it back, damn it, I want it so bad. Anyway, yeah, it's cool. I'd like to thank General Heed once again here for this footage, and as always the links and sources are in the description, but this video shows off the cut gravity rifle from Combat Evolved. Now the footage you're seeing now was a remade design and function wise and how we expected it to work, but now you're seeing the actual model and what it looks like on screen. In terms of functions, there's not a lot other than it utilising fire as a projectile as a placeholder, but interesting to see the model in action. This is one of those things where you can see really easily why it was cut, and there's not a lot of developer talk on it. The design doesn't seem to match any faction from the game it seems, and it does look like it is kind of a Forerunner weapon, but it also doesn't meet any of the Forerunner design language. I imagine it would play much like the Void's Tear in Halo 5, sort of creating a ripple that forces object dragged in round from a certain radius. Overall, I can see why it wasn't in the final game, and I'm kind of glad to be honest because it doesn't really seem to fit the sandbox all that well. Lastly, boats. One of the things we never got to ride in a Halo game, but in all honesty it seems kind of stupid on some level because you've got these spacefaring ships going around everywhere and fast land vehicles, so fighting on the water kinda sounds silly to a certain degree. However, this does not stop me from still wanting to use them in a Halo game. There are actually a couple of instances of water vehicles being used in Halo. A concept for a vehicle called the Doozy in Halo Combat Evolved. We don't actually know the reason why it was cut from gameplay, and there isn't actually any gameplay that exists out there. It just looks like it got to the concept phase. But at the same time we did get to see a boat for cut content from Halo 3, which was from a live presentation that Bungie gave. Honestly, seeing Chief drive a boat seems super weird, but even though it feels super wrong, it feels incredibly right. We only got to see a few seconds, which is a shame, but I would like to see this fleshed out, and with humanity keeping quite a low profile in Halo Infinite, as Cortana's forces tend to have a bit of a patrol over the galaxy, a boat might be a good way to get around instead of flying a ship to get to where you need to be. Honestly, I'm kinda grasping at straws here. It's just a really cool idea I would like to see in a future Halo game. Only time will tell, but that was 7 features cut from Halo games. Let me know what cut feature you'd like to see make a return in a future game someday, and if you'd like me to make a follow-up video, I'm interested to see what resources you guys have for any cut content. Once again, my name is Jack Fletcher, and I will see you next time on the one and the only Ultimate Halo.
Subscribe now to Ultimate Halo for more unfriggin' believable Halo content.